It's Monday, July 18, 2016, UPBOptionMillionaires.com. S&P 500 futures are 0.1% higher here about 2.5 hours before the opening bell. That's after a really swift decline Friday after the closing bell. Turkey, a coup, now failed coup attempt, initially sent futures tumbling over the weekend. Everything calmed down and we're back to that normal uptrend that we've seen since the lows of Brexit. So we have turkey, ham, pastrami. It doesn't matter these days, folks. Every dip, every especially named dip in this market since 2009 has been a great buying opportunity. At the middle of 2013, we broke out of a long-term consolidation. We had the internet bubble crash. We had the housing bubble crash, and we have recovered all those losses, now breaking out to new all-time record highs, breaking out of a 1.5-year consolidation phase for the S&P 500. The volatility continues to melt lower. If you look, the VIX are respecting long-term trend line. Break below this, extend is back down to about 10, which was something that we saw just before the financial crisis started to come to a head. The VIX, and if you look back, it started this year with that 30 level, great sell opportunity for the VIX by the market. U.S. dollar index continues to just gyrate around, not breaking out just yet. Again, I think this is something we're going to look for in the months and years ahead where the U.S. dollar index really start to gain some strength. If you look here, the S&P 500, breaking out again, a lot more clear here on this 20-year monthly chart. You can see this breakout to the upside that we saw off this long-term year consolidation phase for the SPY, which is the S&P 500 ETF. You look at the QQQ and the NASDAQ breaking out as well. Trend line resistance, not much of a foe here as we've broken to the upside for QQQ. Small caps, not back to their highs just yet that we saw last year, but starting to break out as well. See, we were down to 95 back in February, starting to break out here, broke trendline resistance, and now back that 120 level is going to be a tough nut to crack as it was previously. Let's look at some other charts here. How about the financials? Financials on the cusp of breaking out. We have Bank of America earnings this morning. We had last week JP Morgan Chase earnings sent the stock higher, also helped Goldman Sachs get over 160. So look at the financials here as really something to carry this market another leg higher here, as financials have not participated as much. Look at the highs that we saw back before the housing bubble. We have yet to reclaim those. You just look at financials here, starting to consolidate. Are we going to break out or are we going to break down here for financials? Energy also trying to recover some of its losses from its highs at the end of 2014. You see it's broken the trend here to the downside. Now we're breaking out. The next target here for energy ETF XLE is 75. How about some individual names? Well, we have Netflix earnings. I believe after the bell today, you can see Netflix kind of gyrating around here, holding this 90 level. Are we going to break up, see a significant move to the upside? Earnings reports has been a really significant catalyst for Netflix over the years. So we could possibly see a 15 to 20% move in either direction for Netflix. Twitter really starting to find a bottom here. And if you look, the stock hit about 15, found support, and you can see it's starting to work its way up, and you can see maybe an explosive move. As much as we saw the explosive move to the downside for Twitter, start to see move up, especially if we can get to that 20 level for Twitter. Facebook, long-term trend line support, always been respected here since the middle of 2013, and has come back down to it less frequently. So I would think a revisit with this support line, if you're looking for something to trade for downside in this market, I think Facebook has a really good chance of coming back to this trend line, and when it does, it's going to be a great buy opportunity. Speaking of buy opportunity, how about Google? Long term, if you look from a monthly perspective, looks poised to break out to new all-time record highs. We saw it in last year. Remember, it was just gyrating around pretty harmlessly in 2015. Look at these candles here, about the 550 level, before vaulting in a 2-week span, sending some options from 10 cents to $100. And that was just weeks before its earnings report. And here we are, just weeks before its earnings report. So watch Google, was in some calls last week. The 730s at $1, those went up to over $8 each. So if you look Google, in spite of this candle, doesn't look like much, but if we get a nice candle to the upside, 750, which would be precisely 200 more than the breakout level of last year, send us up to new all-time record highs for the GOOGL. Amazon, speaking of record highs, broke the record highs last week. You look at this long-term trend line. Since the end of 2015, the end of 2014, start of 2015, really parabolic move to the upside for Amazon, more than doubling in price, but again, respecting support. And if you look here on a shorter time frame, you can see We are now back over that trend line, respecting it on numerous occasions. And finally, let's look at some crude oil, because I know crude oil, when it goes up, the market goes up, and when it goes down, it gets ignored. But if you look, though, from a longer-term perspective, there's been a delayed reaction with crude oil and S&P 500 futures. So possibly crude oil here starting to roll over again. Are we going to come down to new lows for crude oil? I know everybody thinks the bottom is in. Possible maybe head and shoulders, inverted head and shoulders pattern here, which, if that does indeed happen, would bring us down to about 40 here on crude oil. So something to keep an eye on. I think if crude oil does continue to roll over at some point, it's going to start to take the market with it. You know what? One more chart I forgot to bring up. TLT, the 20-year bond treasury ETF, hit new all-time record highs last week. Was over the 140 level for the very first time, 143 and change, but a significant move to the downside. I pointed out last week, the first couple candles to the downside, kind of mirroring the last time we broke out to record highs back in 2000. Let me go back a little further, in 2015. So we could see more downside here. You can see the breakout we had back at the start of 2015. And support here lies in the low 130s, so you think 133 and change, which is a $5 move for TLT, something to trade for downside. And of course, if bond yields do start to rise, it's something possibly as a headwind here for the market going forward. But right now, momentum clearly to the upside. We've broken out, the SPY is broken out of long-term trend line resistance. This goes back a year and a half, and you can see the breakout, possibly running out of little steam, maybe needs to take a breather here. We start to get really overbought, but momentum clearly with the bulls. UPBOptionmillionaires.com. I'll see you in the chat room.